Hey guys, Space Marine 658 here. Today we're going to be talking about how to create optimized UI. Specifically, we're going to be looking at using attributes to sort of drive your UI. Now, one thing we're going to want to kind of talk about is why using attributes is so important. And the easiest way to explain this is when you're looking at a specific stat, for example, a health bar or a mana bar, a lot of first time users of Unreal Engine will either bind it to it or have it running on tick where it'll update. And that's extremely inefficient in the fact that you think about, even if it's a very lightweight call, in say like a 5-minute time span, you could be running, 36,000 calls in that time frame, assuming you're running at 120 frames a second. And that's a lot of calls. In that exact amount of time with the exact same amount of frames, we could check a single time, and that's assuming they both update once, right? Let's say you take one hit in that 5-minute time frame. Using the method I'm going to show you here, it would only update the single time. So let's dive into how we do that. The first thing we're going to want to do is, when we're kind of building this, is we're thinking about this in terms of how that data is handled. And so on our player, we're going to go ahead and we're going to set up attributes, but we're going to set them up in a way that we can use them to really drive our UI. So let's go ahead and start off by first creating a struct here. And this is just going to be written generically. It'll be an attribute struct. And if we open this up, we don't need anything crazy. All we need is, maybe the current value, and then maybe a max value. You can also put a min or anything else you'd like to put here, but just for now we'll just put a current max. And then what we're going to want to do is actually make a blueprint component. Now this is what's going to actually hold our attributes, and the cool thing is we can use these on anything we want. We can use them on AI, we can use them on the player. However we choose to use them, we can do so. So go ahead and hit blueprint class, and you're going to look for actor component. An actor component is sort of just a chunk of code that's isolated from the player. Now, technically, depending on what you're doing with it, you can have it more tied into the player, things like quest systems and stuff. But honestly, if you make it as generically as possible, it makes it a lot easier to sort of manage. So we'll call this a blueprint component attributes. And we're going to set a couple things up here. So the first thing we're going to want to do is basically those variables. So we're going to want to have two. One will be our health, and one will be our mana. And we're going to want to set these to those attribute variables types. Attribute, and this is the same as attribute. Compile, and then let's go ahead and set some defaults. So we'll say for the health we're at 75, and we'll say 100 is the max, and then for the mana will be 50, 100. And let's go ahead and save, file. Now, of course, you can use this for anything you want, stamina, whatever. These are just what I'm using for now, just kind of show them off. So let's go ahead and do a couple things here. So one thing we're going to do is called change attribute. And then we're also going to want to do something called, let's see. We change attribute, and then we want to add attribute listener. So it's something that's going to listen for when that attribute changes. And as part of this, we're going to want to also create some gameplay tags. Now I've gone ahead here and created them, but if you want to follow along, if you go to your project settings, gameplay tags, there's something called the manage gameplay tags here down the gameplay tag list. And you see here, I have attributes. You just go ahead and hit plus. You can type in attributes and then dot whatever you want. So for example, health and mana. So for example, if I wanted to add additional one for stamina, I would just type that in, and it splits it like that. Now say if you wanted to create a whole new branch, So maybe instead of attributes, you have something that is like skill dot punch. You can just type in the full thing, and what that does is each dot makes a layer. So if you want to have it pretty deep, you can add pretty deep layers to it. But yeah, so let's go back to our system here. So for the change attributes, we're going to want a couple of things. We're going to want a gameplay tag like we had there. And we'll just call this attribute to change. And then we'll give it a value. So we'll say, let's call it value. And now what we'll do is we'll just pull off of here and just have a switch. And then based on the gameplay tag that's selected, so we'll need to add 2 here. So that's going to be the health and the mana. So we'll go down here and add the mana. And we'll just remove the default for now. Depending on which one they select, that will actually be the one we want to change, right? Well, to do that, we're going to want to actually edit, the member variables inside of this attribute. So how do we do that? How do we set that and make it flexible, right? So let's go ahead and we'll set members in attribute, and we'll say, we're going to want to change the current. We don't want to change the max. But if we break this, right, we can get the current and the max. And we want to take the value that's being passed in. So in fact, since it's being passed in there, we just grab the value like this. Oh, sorry, wrong button. We grab the value like this, because now it's a local variable we can access because it's passed in here. We'll grab this value, and we'll say the current minus this value. And then we want to probably clamp this, right? Because we don't want to go above the max or below 0. So then we'll plug in the max here, have the min be 0, and then boom, this is what gets set, right? So this itself is going to actually set the attribute. So cool, we've got the attribute set. But, we could probably condense this down to a function. So we'll collapse it, right? Let's go ahead and collapse, and we'll call this function set attribute. And now it's got 2 pins, but we don't actually care about that. And I guess, yeah, we will need to do this so we can get that value here. And then we only need the one attribute reference, so we can delete the second one. And then we'll just drag off of this again and then plug it in there. And so now that we have, this pass by reference, then if we go back to change attribute, we can just right click and refresh the node. And then we'll just take this value and plug that in there. Now you can see that affects the health. If we want to do the mana, because we've set it up in a flexible way, we just do this, and then instead of health, we can just plug in our mana, and boom, we're pretty much done. Cool. Now, this itself will actually allow us to edit that attribute, but it won't actually send out a message. It doesn't say, hey, this attribute has changed. So how do we actually do that? So that way the UI only updates when that message gets sent out. Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to want to actually create some event dispatchers for each of our attributes, right? We've got health. I guess we'll put health changed. And then for our second one, we'll put mana changed. And then from here, we're going to want to do something that's called creating a signature. Now, event delegates, when they are actually like sending out their message, they can send information with them. Now, to make that information useful for you, you got to kind of think ahead a little bit about what you're going to want on the other end. So what would be the easiest way for us to actually pass that information on to another function? We're going to use this, where, like, let's say in the UI, we could send back a float of the final value of the current, but then we also have to send back the max so we can get the percentage. So that's a little complicated. So instead, what if we just sent back the whole attribute? We could just send the entire attribute as a copy in a message, and then it just knows. It goes, hey, here's what the attribute that updated is. So we call it attribute that was changed. And so what happens is when the health gets changed, right, we're going to return this attribute changed. And one thing we can do is to make this easier for yourself, if you got multiple event dispatchers like you have here, if you just create a custom event and call it like attribute updated, that will make it so that every time you have an event like this where you've got it, you want to add it to another event dispatcher, you can just copy the signature. So we can go attribute updated, and then boom, now it automatically gets that value there. So cool. So we have this set. So now we want to actually make it so that it can be listened to. So what we're going to want to do is go to our add attribute listener. And basically we're going to kind of want to do what we do here, where we're switching on this tag. So we go in here and we'll just drag this into here, and we'll rename this to attribute to listen to. And that way it'll be, whatever we want to actually specifically listen to. So we're listening for the health changed. We're going to bind here. And if we're listening to the mana, we're going to bind here. And then what we're going to do is drag these into the add attribute listener. And what that's going to do is it means when something outside of this component calls this function, it's basically saying, hey, I'm listening for the call of that event dispatcher. And so anytime that call gets made, it's going to alert it. So let's go ahead and actually set up that call now. So now we've got this, so we can add a listener now, right? So let's go back to our change attribute here. So just after our set attribute, so we've made these sets, we're going to call this. And we're going to call it with the updated attribute, right? Because now that we've set the members in those structures, we've actually set those members to be the updated values. We can just basically copy and paste these over, give ourselves a little wiggle room here, and just pass these attributes changed in. So now when one's listening to the call health changed, it'll actually be able to get that updated attribute. So let's go to our HUD now. So one thing we're going to want to do is I've created just like an empty HUD. As you can see here, this is just like the basic tutorial level that Unreal includes as part of the first person blueprint. So what we're going to want to do is you have a basic HUD that you can create. And inside of this HUD, I've just gone ahead and it's nothing but a canvas panel. And then I've got this get player character. Now this is because the player character I am using here is a type character. If you're using a pawn, you'll want to make sure that you do get player pawn or wherever you're actually having that component housed. So let's go ahead and get component by class, and we'll get our attribute component and add listener. Now, the cool thing is, since we've set it up very generically, we can add a listener for each one of the things. Now, as you may notice, well, we're going to have to set this up every time we want a health bar, mana bar, stamina bar, whatever. Maybe we could do this a little bit more condensed. And this isn't a bad way to do it, absolutely. Especially if you only have like 2 or 3, you could probably get away with doing it here. But especially if you plan on having more than just those in terms of attributes that are being bound, we'll definitely want to make a progress bar that can be bound to any attribute we so choose to. And it's just generally a better sort of design philosophy to make it flexible. So let's go ahead and create a new user widget. And this is just going to be of type, we'll just call this a widget underscore prog bar. We'll call it an attribute bar, since that's a little more specific. Attribute bar. And then we will bring that up here. And we're going to do a couple of things first. We'll add a size box to here. And let's make this maybe 200 by 25, something like that. And we'll set this to be desired on screen. So this will give us an idea of roughly what it will look like. So we have our size box, and then within there we'll put our progress bar. And let's make our progress bar a variable, and we'll call it just prog bar. All right, so in our prog bar, on construct, there's some things we're going to want to do. For example, like we were going to do over here in the HUD, we're going to want to get our player character. And then we're going to want to get that component by class. And we'll want to make sure we get our attribute component. And now we're going to want to add listener. Now the cool thing is, because we're wanting to add a listener, in a very dynamic way, what we can do is drag this off, call it promote to variable, and just call it attribute to listen to, and make it expose on spawn, instance editable. Now, on construct, we're saying, hey, here's what we want to listen to. So what do we want to do when we hear a call from this? Well, I would say we probably just want to update our progress bar right? So we just call it update bar. So we'll come out here, we'll do a break here for our values, and then we'll grab our prog bar and set percentage. That way we can actually set the percentage here of what our progress bar is. So we take current and we'll divide it by max, and that'll give us our percentage. Now, this is going to work if we get an update, but when you first load into the game, it's not going to work. So you've got a couple options. You could just call at the very beginning, in fact, what I usually say is the best, option is just on begin play. You're just going to call to these two functions, because then they will update and they will have the current attribute. Now, if you are loading your game in, this probably will work just fine, because if you think about it, you're going to load in these values before begin play, and you're going to have them load into the player character, and then you're going to start the game. You're going to start the begin play, and then that's when these will fire. So if we go ahead and just hit start, it would also help if we went in here, and if I wasn't such a dingus, and we just added our attribute bars up here. So we just slap those on there, and we'll put that in the middle just to make it look visually nice. Put like a 0.5 and then say size to content. And then we'll say this first one's going to be health, and then we're going to duplicate it and make the second one mana. And then we'll drop it down, say like, since that's 50, we'll drop it down like 60, so it's a little bit of a gap. Oh, sorry, that's 25. We'll drop it 35, give it 10 space gap. As you can see, it doesn't look like they're really, loading it with any value. And that's because we don't have any component on the player. So now we've created the component, we need to actually go in and actually add that specific component to our actual player character. So just type in BPC, and then we got the attribute there. And you'll also want to make sure you come over to the health and mana and make sure that the values are here correct. Now the default I set was 75 out of 100 and 50 out of 100. Technically, you probably just want them to both be the same because the max and current are going to be the same at the beginning of the game. But if you're ever wanting to edit it, say on loading a save, you would just edit these two, on your loading function. So let's go ahead, and that should be pretty much working. All right. So it actually looks like on begin play, those functions actually don't fire. I forgot that the components actually don't initialize until a little bit later on. So what we can go ahead and do is inside of here, whenever we actually first get set up and we get this bar created, what we can actually do is call out to this component and just have it update those two from the beginning. So actually, if we go here, all right. So one last thing we'll want to go ahead and add is we're going to want to add a get attribute by tag. And so what this will do is this will make it so that whenever we start the game, we're going to want to be able to grab our attribute to start off those health bars. So let's go ahead and just add in attribute to get. And we can use that exact same switch that we have before. And if we just plug these in, then we can just return. Oops, there we go. Oh, sorry, not attribute to get. This should be a gameplay tag. I was wondering why that wasn't plugged in correctly. So with our attribute to get, we will just return this. And then what we can do is, depending on which one it goes, we will just have a return node here. And we'll just return the correct attribute depending on which one is being returned. So we'll go ahead and drag this off here. Sorry, whoops. Grab this one here, set it, and then we'll just call this attribute to return. And then we'll also make another node here, and this will be our mana. All right. And so with this, we'll just go ahead and go into our progress bar, and we'll actually just call that function there at the beginning. Get attribute by tag, and we'll just plug in the tag to listen to. And then basically we can do this exact same attribute here. So the cool thing is if we just collapse this to a function, and we'll just call this update bar. Oh, I guess we call that there. Update prog bar. And then we just copy and paste it over here. And we just call that exact same function at the beginning. So when you first load in, it's going to load in the progress bar, and then any updates that are made, it'll update those. So you can see here, we have our two bars at the top. And if we go to our player character, we can actually, as you can see here, we can just set up some test key bindings. So I've got num1 and num2, and we'll set those up to be -5 and 5. 5 will actually, 5 will decrease the health, and -5 will increase the health. So we go ahead and press this here, as you can see, we can increase and decrease the health, and it is capped by that max and min. And so because of this, the only time this attribute bar will actually be updated is anytime those attributes change. So as you can see here, these are changing whenever I hit that button. And in the same way, in your game, it will only update when it actually changes. So if it never changes, it never hits that update. So there's no unwasted performance. All right. I think that's pretty much it for today. That is basically using attributes to optimize your code for UI. If you have any other questions or any help you need, definitely leave it down below. But otherwise, good luck and good hunting.